Hello, Trinity Tigers. Welcome to the Learning Together Live webinar series as part of the Lifelong Learning Initiatives presented by Trinity University's Office of Alumni Relations. I'm Manny Gonzalez, class of 2007, joined here by some respected colleagues from across campus going to talk about behind the curtain, trends in college admissions and financial aid planning. It'll be a riveting discussion, and we look forward to the Q&A that will come afterwards. But a little bit about myself. I serve on Trinity University's Alumni Association board. Great opportunity in the future. If you're wanting to learn more, please come and talk to me during Alumni Weekend, which is next weekend. If you haven't registered, please register. I'll plug it again at the very end of this webinar. But professionally, I serve as a senior institutional support consultant for an organization in Austin called Trellis Company. Now, a lot of what I do is work in the space of enrollment management, admissions, and financial aid and graduation, helping under-resourced and underserved institutions across the country with their metrics in terms of college accessibility, college affordability, and addressing student debt. And so I'm joined here by some colleagues, Justin, Doty, and Christina Pikla.
Correct, yes.
And I will give a quick bio. I'll read from this paper, but then I'll let you just introduce yourselves as well. And so Justin has been a part of the Trinity family since 2000, which feels like just yesterday, right?
Right, exactly.
He is passionate about offering alumni a great rewarding experience with their outreach efforts towards prospective families involved in the college search. And now Christina is actually an alum of Trinity.
Correct.
As well.
Class of 2004.
Class of 2004, 15-year.
Yes, another shout out for Alumni Weekend.
Yes.
It's a reunion year for my class, so I hope you've registered.
And has been part of financial aid here since 2006, both starting as counselors and now are director and dean in their respective roles. Now, Christina is an active member of both state and national financial aid associations, and Christina is committed to the financial aid profession to help students, families, alumni, and colleagues that she serves. Now, before I start engaging with Justin and Christina and give them an opportunity to give a little context, again, I want to plug Alumni Weekend, but I would also want to make sure that from a housekeeping standpoint, you know that we have the opportunity for Q&A at the very end of the session. And so please feel free to chime in with any questions. We hope to get to all of them. This is going to be very exciting, so I hope we will have a long list of questions. But let me first start by, I guess, allowing my colleagues here to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump right in.
I'll let you go ahead.
Okay, so I've been here since 2006. All 13 years of my financial aid administrator career have been luckily here as a Tiger at Trinity. As Manny indicated, I did start as a financial aid counselor, and over time I've had the pleasure of being able to kind of just work through the process to get to the role that I'm in right now as the financial aid director. What I do as a director is different than what I did in some of my other roles, which was a lot more granular interfacing with students and families, a lot of oversight now, making sure that we are compliant with federal, state regs, which is very important, reporting, and then also being an advocate. And that's one of the things that I'm really enjoying about the role that I find myself in. I work, as many indicated as well, I am involved in both the State of Texas and National Association for Student Financial Aid Administrators, as well as the College Board, and have had the opportunity to really become more of a presenter and a presence. So that's something that I have been enjoying.
A great resource if you have any questions about Trinity and how to pay for Trinity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And we'll
She's
get
a
to
great person.
Our area.
Yes. And Justin, share a little bit about yourself.
So it's been a wonderful 2 decades. It's really hard to say that out loud, 20 years. But it's been really fun for me to wear different hats in admissions. So similar to Christina, kind of the road warrior. When I first got to Trinity and managing territories, served as our state association president for a few years, which was a highlight. Now I find myself in the dean role and really overseeing a staff of about 25. So, and I thought it would be interesting to just talk about the teams within the department. We have, to really kind of make this all work, we have a wonderful visit team led by Gonzalez. I think a lot of alumni know her. So you think about kind of the daily visit and the events, and we just hosted a large-scale Trinity in Focus, almost 800 total guests here on Saturday. So they're managing that, as well as inviting high school counselors and college counselors to campus. So that's an integral part. The operations team is led by Valerie Schweers. I always feel like operations is the backbone. I mean, all these applications and documents flowing into Trinity are going through operations, and then everything is flowing out of operations as well, managing all the communication flow and the operating system. So they really are extremely critical to our success. And then the recruitment staff, there's about a dozen of them. And this is the time of the year where they're just canvassing the country. And so, we're East Coast to West Coast and internationally visiting high schools, going to college fairs, conducting interviews. And I see them as kind of the public-facing, Trinity face, and they're super talented and pretty tenured as well. So it's been a really wonderful ride.
So that alone, in terms of y'all's introductions, I think may have shed light that this is bigger than just two people in terms of
it always is.
welcoming an incoming class. And I think what people may not realize is that there are a lot of folks who are involved, and there's ways to get involved, and we'll get to that a little bit later at the end of this webinar, talking about how you as an alum can either think about getting involved as a direct to student or prospective student engagement kind of official, or even thinking about ways that you can get your student who you hope to attend Trinity, how you can get them plugged in and potentially nudge them towards Trinity. But before we get kind of to there, let's start off with just talking about enrollment management as a whole. I think it's a relatively new term that's been used the past 5-10 years in higher ed. But what exactly is enrollment management? Could you talk about maybe the basics of what does that mean on a college campus?
Sure. It's been interesting for us because things have shifted in a really good way at Trinity in the last 2 or 3 years. This is a new shift for us in the sense that we now have this umbrella of enrollment management. Eric Malouf is our vice president for enrollment. It's a cabinet level position, which I think has been huge, really key. Right. Underneath that umbrella, this is where student financial services plays a role, working in tandem with the admissions office. And those are areas that you never want to be siloed, because they really do work hand in hand when it comes to recruiting students and enrolling them and seeing kind of that to and through Trinity piece.
Yeah, and the to and through is definitely something that it's language that we've adopted here at Trinity and as part of our enrollment management division when we were forging our divisional mission statement recently. And I say forging because the division of enrollment management is actually a relatively new division for Trinity. When Justin was speaking earlier about admissions is one piece of the umbrella that feeds into the enrollment management spectrum. We also have student financial services, which is the area that I work within. And so financial aid and student accounts and or the bursar, kind of the billing collecting piece that is an essential function as well. Both of those functional areas fall within the purview of enrollment management here at Trinity. So if we're speaking specifically Trinity, it really is the attracting, the making sure that families know the academic experience and offering and kind of who we are as Trinity, and then also the opportunity to couple that with being very strategic and I think streamlined in a lot of ways, and how the finance piece interplays with that and how we're interfacing with families. Large level at other institutions, you can see the registrars, I think sometimes academic affairs. There's any number of variances, I guess, in what could be an enrollment management structure at an institution. But really the main piece is this understanding that as higher education, it really does take a village, and that's something that we'll touch on later. And so to and through is the important thing, not only just getting students to an institution, but really focusing on degree completion and supporting them all the way through.
And I want to emphasize the importance of partnerships and close partnerships at that. You know, a lot of institutions across the country are basically coupling financial aid and admissions and some other offices together, but you all work really closely with each other in the way that you all work together, in the way that, and the reason why that's important is that if student comes, you know, a prospective student comes with a question, or a family member comes with a question about the process, about where they stand, about, you know, paying, things of that sort, you can play off of each other and really get face-to-face interaction to address those questions. I mean, that can't be said necessarily of you know, I'll just say larger institutions. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say you're exactly right in the sense that we're a community of 2,500, and it's almost this expectation of families as really consumers of higher ed. You know, the affordability piece is for most families kind of the biggest piece of the pie when they're making decisions, and so it wouldn't make sense for us to work with them in admissions and kind of be divorced of financial aid and scholarships, and so it's all playing an integrated role.
And so in your experience, I mean, especially y'all have both been around for a handful of years, you feel as though it kind of organically it's evolved into becoming a much more symbiotic kind of relationship where you can play off of each other and address need, and again understand that this is often, you know, we talk about, you know, what's going to make or break a student's decision of attending a school. The affordability piece plays a big part of that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and you said symbiotic. Yes, that is absolutely the case. And with the time that I've been here at Trinity, I feel that in the past year and a half even, there's been more lift and more collaboration, and that goes hand in hand with the creation of the Enrollment Management Division, but in our areas being able to work collaboratively in serving students and families better.
Absolutely.
Well, so I want to transition now into this kind of this next space that we want to talk about. So I appreciate the context as to the operations of enrollment management, especially at Trinity, especially as compared to maybe large state institution down the road. But not to throw shade. But I want to talk more about the now shifting demographics of higher ed, especially for those people in the audience who are very interested in what, you know, higher ed looks like, you know, what Trinity will look like, you know, what are Trinity's challenges, you know, in creating a new class as compared to, you know, peers, not just in Texas, but, you know, across the nation as we try to become, you know, competitive with other institutions across the nation. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, the shifting demographics in the country and the national landscape kind of headwinds with regards to enrollment?
Sure. And before I get into demographics, I might provide a little context about kind of where we are now versus even just 5 years ago, because I feel like we honestly, we are seeing some pretty monumental shifts in the world of enrollment, which is really exciting, but it really is producing some challenges too. So if you think about kind of the admissions funnel, this year, we received close to 10,000 applications. We're only aiming to enroll a first-year class of about 640, and we have 646 students on campus this year, so we feel like, yay us, you know, as a combined effort. And so, but if you kind of backtrack 5 years ago, the applicant pool was half of that. So it was about 5,000, 5,500, and still trying to enroll 640, and so I think for us, just seeing that volume, and it's been a combination of seeing just the sheer quantity and that funnel on the top end dramatically increasing, but also quality. And so we're seeing this kind of new caliber, academic caliber of student and applicant. And so while this kind of shift is honestly kind of unheard of to see an admit rate 5 years ago of 49%, about 1 out of every 2 students being admitted, to this year 29%, so approaching 1 out of every 4 almost. That truly is kind of unheard of in our space. And so it's exciting to kind of see, in some sense, kind of the demand curve bending a little bit, but it's also proving to be very challenging in terms of making those decisions. You know, where do you draw the line between an accepted student and a deferred student? and a defer and a wait list and a wait list and a deny. So there almost has been this like recalibration that's taking place among our staff about kind of this new norm. And so just, I think that just providing a level of context and then getting into demographics, it has gotten very interesting to look at projections and where things are headed.
Now, because you segued into it, and we'll go back to kind of the national landscape and trends, but you mentioned the class, what was the number?
646 this year.
646, and the admissions, the applications are going through the roof.
Right.
You know, some people might ask, well, why don't you just admit more students?
Right.
You know, why not admit, you know, especially if it's a more competitive pool, why don't we double it, you know?
Right.
And again, that these are very hyperbolic. People people at Trinity aren't saying double, but I'm saying, you know, maybe outsiders might think that. Can you give some context as to, you know, why that isn't so simple to, you know, just just increase the number of students who would be coming in?
Well, for sure, one of the things is culture. I mean, institutions that are having conversations like that, you really need to take a look at what is the culture of your institution and who is it that you're wanting to be. And I can speak from my experience as a Trinity alum. Maybe you felt the same, and hopefully some of the individuals watching right now, but there definitely is a community feel at Trinity. And when you look at our facilities even, and you know, in order to continue to meet the need for smaller classes, the desire for smaller classes, being able to have the residency experience that we all as Tigers have experienced, you can't just on a dime go ahead and double the number of students that you're accepting and maintain the essence of what that experience and the culture are.
Something I wanted to point out that I find this interesting. I know you're a fellow enrollment management nerd like us, and kind of geek out over the data. But you know, it is we did admit more students last year, and the result was we over enrolled. You know, so last year we brought in a class of 690. It's too much, you know, and so we're built for more of a 640, 650 entering class. So there is a ripple effect. If you under enroll or if you over enroll, the hardest part of my job and I think just in the world of enrollment management is predicting yield. And so it's the number of students who enroll out of the number of students that you admit. And so the $1 million question is, if you admit 10 students, are 1 or 2 going to enroll, or 8 or 9 going to enroll? And so we actually over yielded a little bit last year, and so we had to dial it back a little bit this year. But that is the hardest part, and now this is fascinating in our world. All these predictive models, you know, all these institutions using data to drive decisions, but it's not 100% accurate. You know, we're also working with 17-year-old students. You know, and so for those parents out there, like, you know, the decision making of 17-year-olds is a little unpredictable. And so, you know, there's so many factors and nuances, you know, when we have a finite number of admit spots to dole out, how many students will ultimately enroll. So it's tricky. It also gets into that kind of fourth leg of the stool about the composition of the class. So before we get to the composition, I guess I really do want to get to kind of what are you seeing in terms of the national landscape of higher ed. And so for some context, you know, there's stories kind of nationally about schools in the Northeast shutting down because enrollment is just declining across the board. You know, there's been talk about you know, schools in the Northeast again consolidating because again enrollment declining, but that's not the case here in Texas. If I'm, you know, can you explain, you know, what's going on in Texas? What does it look like, not just in Texas, across the nation, and what is kind of Trinity seeing when it comes to the national landscape? Yeah, and so I'm glad you asked that, because I actually have.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow,
Manny. This is uncanny. So we're for the visual learners out there, we do actually have a few slides that we were going to pass along just stats wise to give people a sense for what this may be looking like. So, you know, looking at the national landscape, you can see New England, Northeast, even the South and parts of the West declining in this projected change in the next 10 years, looking at number of high school grads. What's interesting, if you look at Texas, it's a little over 2% projected growth, but the sheer volume of students far outpaces any of these other states. So
it's 2%, but 2% of a very large population.
Right.
So that means a lot more than however percent, and again, no offense to our viewers in Maine, but the population of Maine is a little bit different than Texas.
Well, and so one of the things that we've seen is, the volume and the projected growth, even at 2% in Texas. All of the areas that are kind of in the warm tones, there's a lot more of infiltration, if you will, of schools from those areas that are really focusing on Texas as part of their enrollment initiatives in trying to recruit students from the Texas area to their institutions. And so that's something that, even though, yes, we need to, yes, we have more graduates, but just being aware of the trends in the national landscape.
So that's a good point. And so what people may not realize is that, yes, again, naturally we're increasing in population, increasing in the number of high school graduates. These other states where they're seeing a decline in high school graduates, they are trying to supplement their college enrollment numbers with Texas students. And so what that means is that, all of a sudden, an institution in New Mexico or Louisiana or even California, these schools are going out of their way to siphon, Texas students, potentially Trinity targets as well. And so I guess to that point, would you say that it's getting more and more competitive to compete for these students?
100%. I mean, we feel like we're in this position now of almost needing to protect our backyard. Where Houston. If you think about these Texas markets for us, that traditionally, we're attracting and enrolling high populations of students. Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio. Those cities are not getting any smaller anytime soon. The economy is strong. So you're seeing a lot of these colleges, as Christina was talking about, kind of Texas is in the crosshairs, and they're kind of doubling down on their efforts to recruit here. So it's also kind of leading us into some interesting conversations about what does our geographic mix of students look like, and what could it look like in the future, that in-state versus out-of-state versus international. And that's important to us, like that kind of that geographic spread, and urban versus rural. That's just, it's becoming harder and harder to recruit these out-of-state populations, I feel like. And I think it's only going to become maybe more pronounced in the next 10 years.
So to your point, when creating an incoming class, there are a lot of things to factor in. I think people often will go to racial and ethnic diversity or socioeconomic diversity, but geographic diversity plays in. Talent plays in terms of the students' academic interests. A number of different factors play in. But in particular, I guess you're saying Trinity could be filling its class if it just went with Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin. I mean, just from sheer numbers, right? And so it's really intentional that we go beyond that. Now, what does that look like for your office?
Yeah, this is where I really enjoy this part of it, because I feel like it's engineering or crafting the first year class. It's certainly challenging, but I think when you're bringing in a class of 640 students, you want it to be as diverse as you can possibly make it. And of course, I think when we use the word diversity, it's in the broadest sense. Certainly race and ethnicity plays a role, but geographic spread, socioeconomic. We've had conversations about this with financial aid. What does that spectrum look like? Access, the access piece, and first generation. Also, sometimes, and gender, I would say as well, that striking that balance. It's interesting, too, when you start, a lot of institutions looking at kind of academic programs. And so thinking about the incoming students, how many of those students are leaning business versus STEM versus humanities or the arts. So that's something to kind of contend with. Areas of special talent, too, for sure. And so For us, we will enroll typically about 23 to 25% varsity athletes.
Wow.
So that's a significant portion of our incoming class. So that mix of athletes, recruited fine arts, recruited debaters, legacy students, I mean, all of this starts to really kind of play a role in just the composition of the student body.
Yeah. As far as composition of class, one thing I wanted to circle back to, just to give a little bit more context for those of you who might be watching this, is you heard about the fourth leg of the stool. We kind of take for granted sometimes, I think, that in enrollment management there's this concept of a three-legged stool, which is really the three pillars that if you're looking at trying to bring in an entering class, that you're trying to hit each of those targets. So head count being one, how many students are you hoping to yield? Revenue being the other, so knowing that tuition dollars are what fund the operation of an institution, what does that need to look like in order to keep that ship moving forward? And then academic quality. So as far as institutional goals are concerned, you know, what does that look like for your institution? And so historically, that's kind of been this three-legged stool concept that we talk about in enrollment management, and Justin really is hitting on just how nuanced the fourth leg is with composition of class.
And the tricky thing that I would just add about that stool is it can be kind of precarious, you know, and so a lot of enrollment managers, and I'll see most of them tomorrow at our national conference, you know, they feel like if they can hit 2 out of 3, it's a successful year.
Yes.
You know, most of those legs of those three-legged stool is kind of mutually exclusive. So if you think about institutions that want to grow their head count, yes, maybe they can also grow their net revenue by bringing in more students. But what happens to the academic quality?
Exactly.
You know, typically they have to go deeper into their pool and just to accept more students, to enroll more students. So, you know, we've been fortunate when we're kind of setting enrollment goals to try to hit 3 out of 3. We've been able to kind of navigate that, which I don't take for granted for a second.
Not at all.
And we tell our staffs, like, this is, we should feel really good about kind of where we are right now. But it's even just pulling a lever ever so slightly on any of those can have some serious ripple effects.
Now, you have one more slide, though, if I'm not mistaken, regarding you know, diversity and as it relates to high school graduates. And I wanted to come back to this just because I wanted the audience to see, you know, again, trends with regards to high school graduates.
Yeah, I thought this was interesting. If you just take a look at Texas, you know, and seeing kind of the population, to me, you can't really just look at the population of students, but really digging in and drilling into kind of race, ethnicity, who are the students that we're serving. And, you know, it's changing dramatically, you know, the diversity within the state of Texas, and it's causing a lot of institutions to think about, you know, who are the students that we're serving? What are the needs of those students? How can we best be prepared? You know, and so seeing the Hispanic, kind of Latinx population really expanding quite dramatically, that's something for us to kind of bear in mind. Asian students in the state of Texas, African American students is on the rise ever so slightly in our state. So I did want to showcase that because I think this is important.
Again, playing into the composition of that entering class. Now, you mentioned, Christina, with regards to the entering class, one of the things that's taken consideration is socioeconomic status. You know, I know that one of the big conversations across the country is about college affordability. You know, there are a lot of misperceptions. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of uncertainty. I mean, it's a big cost, an investment. You know, some would say, but it's something that is a growing conversation for families. It's growing in importance with regards to conversation. You know, gone are the days where, you know, the size of your dorm and residence hall is going to be the deciding factor. Ultimately, I mean, for some people it is, and that's fine. And Trinity has great residence halls.
It may tip the scale.
Yeah, Trinity has great residence halls, as many of you will remember. But more and more, today's student is more and more price conscious, and it's in their families as well. And with that, I want to ask you questions about sticker price, because I think for the uninitiated folks who are looking up, tuition costs for maybe a child that they or somebody that's they're trying to help navigate either usher towards the Trinity or just in general higher education, they see tuition and some may scoff because it's higher than what it used to be. Could you explain, in particular what sticker price is, and especially and kind of dispel some concerns that people have about sticker price?
Yeah, no, so first and foremost, sticker price, and that is something I'm sure that many of you have heard, not just tuition. You really have to look at, if you're thinking about for your students and or helping other students, niece, nephew, what have you along the process, there's living costs that are associated. Is it a residential community like Trinity? There's travel, there's books, there's supplies. So all institutions have a figure, a budget that's called a cost of attendance value that will be public facing on the institution website. And so when I hear the term sticker price as a financial aid administrator, that is what I'm thinking of, what is the comprehensive cost of attendance that the institution is saying would be realistic for enrollment for that academic year.
So cost of attendance is not just tuition, because that's only, it's a big portion, but that there's still all of the items necessary to be successful in college.
To be comprehensive, you really definitely need to take into account the other factors that are associated with that. So sticker price being that comprehensive cost, and then net price is really what is it that a family after assistance, so namely gift aid, which would be scholarships and grants, money that does not need to be repaid. What's the net price that a family is paying for that educational experience after those dollars are taken into account? And here at Trinity, we are very lucky, in part thanks to the donors that we have, to be able to offer a robust financial aid program. When I say financial aid program, I am including into that academic merit scholarship as well as institutional need-based aid. So students who are applying with the FAFSA application who demonstrate financial need, which simply defined is that the ability to pay measure that's attained by that FAFSA application is below what our cost of attendance structure is. So this past cycle, with the 2018-19 academic year, Trinity administered just around $60 million in institutional aid, which would be the merit scholarship and in Trinity grant, our need-based grant.
Now, that's not a small number. I mean, not just surely just from the size of the number, but in general, I guess I want to bring attention that Trinity was recognized for the amount of merit aid that it administered. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so, so number one, so I know that there are a lot of lists out there, and
there are,
and rankings become kind of confusing because you're one on one list and then different on another list. But merit aid in particular is an important one because it acknowledges that cost of attendance can be expensive, but because of the competitiveness of the student that is attending, the talent that's brought, that there is means to help students afford higher education here at Trinity University.
That is absolutely correct. And as far as merit aid is concerned, just to kind of qualify that, students are considered based on, as the name implies, their merit, which is typically academic, but as Justin touched on with kind of the factors of enrollment, looking holistically at that student's aid application. And how I explain this to families is if you think about not just at Trinity, but wherever your student may be considering, if you look at where your student falls within that broad applicant pool, that is kind of how those decisions are made as far as if they qualify for academic merit scholarship. So yes, we are very fortunate at Trinity to have, like I said, a robust financial aid program which includes merit scholarship.
So again, for the audience who are trying to compare, window shop, so to speak, just looking at tuition at private institutions, let's say Southwestern, Baylor, TCU, even if those costs from a tuition standpoint may be more or less than Trinity, the key takeaway here is that that's not the whole picture. That in fact, merit aid and other kind of supplemental aid can help make that price that you're actually paying out of pocket much more much less and is much more affordable.
Yes, exactly. And on the reverse of that, one thing that I see in a question that we get oftentimes, and probably you as well, just with scholarship question, is X institution offered me greater scholarship and or overall aid package, but then X institution ends up on the comprehensive costing more. So really from a family perspective, being kind of an informed consumer, if you will, on looking at what are the costs that are realistic and then what is the institution able to offer.
Now, I know we're getting into the weeds, and I know we're jumping into a lot of different complex topics, and we only have a little bit of time. And so I want to again give another plug that the great thing about Trinity's enrollment management team that you both do a great job about is making yourself accessible. And so if there's confusion about again terms that are being tossed out, trying to understand an award letter if somebody was admitted, that ask questions and you don't have to worry about being put on on some type of list that you'll get back to within a week or two, that you can usually get a pretty quick response from a Trinity staff member.
Right.
Is that kind of your experience?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's something I know for us. We're constantly fielding questions and turning around answers really in a timely fashion. Something that's helped, I think, also on the merit piece is we tend to be pretty transparent on our website. We have actually a public-facing scholarship grid that a lot of families have come up and said thank you, because sometimes it seems like smoke and mirrors when you're looking at different colleges and when you're trying to do financial planning, especially if there's multiple children in the family that you're trying to allocate projected costs. So that's been helpful. But yeah, I think, again, in tandem, working with families on just what that net cost might look like.
Real quick, because sticker price and cost of attendance, financial aid, I think we have some slides about financial aid. So if you want to quickly give context as to what we're seeing here, that'd be great.
So the one that you all are looking at right now, really what hits home with this, top 10 reasons candidates would search an institutional website. This is the top 10. Within the top 5, 3 of those have to do with costs and financial aid. And so when you talk about sticker price, when you talk about affordability, this is just another support, if you will, that really is the reality of what students and families are experiencing. And then the other, if we go back a slide, this just shows specifically at private 4-year institutions that even though family incomes are increasing, especially since the recession in 2009, the financial need that we're seeing amongst students who are applying is increasing as well. And so what that hits at is that the cost of education is increasing at least at or slightly above the rate in which incomes are. So underscoring yet again just the importance of the aid that is able to be administered and families' interest in knowing affordability and net price.
Thank you. Now, before we transition to the next, I guess, conversation about how, as an alumni, we can potentially impact, and support the admissions and enrollment team, I want to talk about or ask a quick question about a topic that, again, we've been touching about, but I'm sure our folks in the audience are really curious about, is legacy. Okay. Now, legacy, in terms of a policy, and I'll let you explain what legacy typically means, but, when creating that class, I think there are some misconceptions as to, if you're of a certain mold, if you have a perfect SAT score, you're automatically admitted, or if you are of a certain, I guess, if you have a certain skill set, that you're automatically admitted. And that's not the case. Right. So can you talk about the factors, and in particular, how they're weighted, and then highlight legacy in particular? Yeah.
We feel this question a lot, and so, first and foremost, what we tell families, if you think about, and the buzzword is holistic, whenever you go on these admissions information sessions, you hear that word pop up a lot. By far, the factor that's, I think, weighted most heavily, for sure at Trinity, but at most institutions, rests on the student's high school GPA, combined with how rigorous their curriculum is within the context of their high school. And I think that's important, and families know there's a wide variance from school to school. That we put a lot of stock into that at Trinity, because that is the single best predictor of academic success once they're at Trinity, and retention. Yeah. And so we tend to emphasize that a lot. Testing is probably maybe the second biggest slice of the pie right now, although we're starting to do some validity studies this upcoming year of testing and how much emphasis should be placed on that. And then the rest of the pie, this is where it gets interesting in terms of extracurricular, the student's essay, letters of recommendation. And so where legacy plays a role is, and I guess I would have alums tuning in to kind of be a fly on the wall and kind of picture what our admissions committee would look like. There's about 11 or 12 of us sitting around a table, toiling over decisions. Sometimes it gets a little impassioned. You know, people feel very strongly about certain candidates. This is where you have to kind of rest back on institutional values and institutional needs. And in many cases, there's factors that can tip scales. A recruited athlete can tip a scale. A recruited debater, a recruited musician, you know, someone that with a really compelling essay or story or background, legacy. And I think for us, this is, we're kind of defining this as, you know, a grandparent, a parent, or a sibling has graduated. And so it could be a sibling currently attending the institution. So for us, that definitely enters the picture. We really do value the relationship that we have with Trinity alumni and that bond, and it's kind of that Tigers for life mentality. And so when we get excited, you know, when we see a student has connections in some capacity, you know, that's something that weighs into our discussion, but kind of knowing that at the baseline, when we offer admission, this is a student we feel really confident can come in and do the work and be successful and really thrive in the community. So, you know, those are kind of at the base standard, and then other factors can tip scales.
So legacy can potentially supplement an impact, but, you know, at the end of the day, we're still, as an institution, admitting students who meet kind of rigorous academics, you know, qualifications.
Yeah, and I think about, you know, when you're evaluating an applicant pool, there's students that are clearly admissible. There's students that are clearly inadmissible. Then there's a lot of students in that gray area. And that's where it gets really fun, you know, and talking about the students that sometimes we consider on the bubble for admission. And that's where tipping scales can play a role.
Got it. Now, I know we're kind of running short on time, and I want to get to some questions shortly, but before we get to the questions, I want to ask you both, how can alumni get involved?
Yeah.
You know, again, we have an alumni audience here. We have alums who are very passionate about Trinity, and you know, they want to be able to or maybe they want to get involved and they just don't know how. And are there ways that alums can get involved?
Yeah, for sure. And Christina touched on the sense that when we enroll a class, it goes well beyond our two departments. So we think about Trinity faculty, Trinity staff, our students, our parents, our coaches, and our alumni. I mean, our alumni base for recruiting has been instrumental. We are actually really fortunate in the admissions office to have a dedicated position. Nicole Fratto serves as our coordinator for alumni and parent recruitment. And so that has been a game changer for us to have a dedicated position. She works with alumni to get them integrated into the recruitment process. So there is a recruitment network, and this is something that we've had for a number of years. You may see a link, and you are seeing a link that will show up that basically you can kind of go to this web address. This is where you can sign up and immediately get plugged in as an alum and start to make an impact. And I do have some areas of impact, and I can share those if you want.
Yeah, so you don't have to be the director of financial aid as an alum.
That is absolutely correct. You know, that's actually the only reason I became the director, is so I could be.
I will say candidly, I'm somebody who volunteers in my spare time. I know that I've talked to friends, former colleagues, they're current colleagues, former classmates, about how they can get involved. It's as intense as one wants. You can be somebody, and you can leverage your talents in any way possible. So if you're somebody who appreciates and enjoys public speaking, there are opportunities to kind of serve as an ambassador, so to speak, to an audience of prospective students, parents, and to share your experiences. But there's also an opportunity for those who may be more introverted, for instance, or may be limited on free time, to do things such as letter writing campaigns where you send thoughtful congratulatory remarks to an incoming class, and that can be as few as 5 and as many as 20. Again, and Nicole does a great job of providing the resources and the instruction and making it as much or as little as you can do. And so please visit that site, contact Nicole. You have some additional remarks?
I was going to say there's, I think, about 3 areas of impact. College fairs, which, when we think about Trinity being represented at fairs across the country, there's no way we can hit all of those with our staff, so we kind of outsource this to our alums, and they always have a really good experience. Last year, alums covered about 32 different college fairs across the country, and actually 3 internationally, which I thought was really impressive. Wow, yeah. This year, almost 35 college fairs being covered, which is really exciting this month and next month. Letter writing, as you mentioned, and so the stat that I thought was really compelling is last year a little over 130 alumni wrote personalized handwritten letters to almost 1,800 admitted students. Wow. So that was basically 2/3 of the accepted students received, and that was powerful. Yeah. For a student to get in the midst of all of this college admissions propaganda, like a handwritten letter saying, this is who I am, this is the Trinity experience I had, and that really, I think, resonated with students. Receptions, we host, alumni and current parents hosted about 20 different receptions last year in their homes. And so we like to do that just because I think it underscores, kind of the intimacy, the personalization that we have at Trinity. And so those are done across the country as well. So anyway, those were kind of 3 things that were top of mind that I wanted to pass along.
And to be clear, you don't have to have been a student leader, or a certain, responsibility on campus. You're looking for folks who are very passionate about Trinity,
right,
who can speak to their experiences and why they love Trinity and why they think it would be a great institution for anybody to attend.
Right, and this generation, honestly, they are very outcomes driven. And so that, for them to be able to connect with alumni, to understand this is the value of a Trinity degree, and this is what these alums are doing now, I think that really is something that our students now are seeking.
And from a letter writing standpoint, you think about students now, they've been inundated with technology and email from day one. And so a hard physical letter is actually something I think that is becoming a little bit more weight. Yeah, retro, it's old as new, again. But so something seemingly as small as that does have a big impact.
All right, so I'm going to go to the questions now. Again, please feel free to type those in. I will get to as many of those as I can. And so the first question is about financial aid in particular.
Excellent.
So UT Austin recently announced that it would make tuition free for families making less than $65K per year. A number of other institutions have done similar models where, again, making higher education more affordable for families that may be low income. Many prestigious and private institutions in other states have made similar changes. Is Trinity moving in this direction?
So what that gets at is what we refer to in the financial aid community as meeting financial need. So these institutions that have done initiatives like that, they really define for them what financial need is. So are loans involved, is student work involved, and then of course the kind of on top of that being gift aid. That is something that at Trinity we have had conversations about and that we are actively looking into is as an institution, knowing the resources that we have available to pour into financial aid, and then also the types of students and the financial profiles that families have coming into Trinity, is there a way that we can, from a fiduciary standpoint, meet the needs of the institution and also be more robust in how we're meeting financial aid or financial need, for students. So yes, we are considering, what that might look like at Trinity.
So another financial aid question.
It's financial aid time of year.
It is. I am the parent of a high school sophomore just starting to do college searching and scholarship applications. I Google related subjects and am overwhelmed at the search results and don't know which ones are really most useful. And sorry for the scoff. I do a lot of Googling and am overwhelmed as well. Are there any particular websites or books I should read for advice? I haven't looked for college in 30 years. Sorry to out you. I won't tell you.
We don't know who asked the question.
Right.
So
I won't say the name, but yes.
It can be overwhelming, and maybe not even it is overwhelming, especially when you kind of just put that broad out there scholarships. So one tip I would say, and this may be something that a lot of people already know, but when you are going through a college search process, and that's looking at institutions and then also financing scholarship options, it is an ideal situation for students to create their own kind of college email address. That is how students and families, so maybe parents have, the login for that, and that's how you're able to monitor the in and out of communication. And the reason I say that as well is that, yes, there are a number of what are referred to as scholarship search engines that can basically provide some very good and relevant opportunities for students, but you're going to get spam email that's going to be kind of hitting throughout, and so to protect your personal email. College Board has one in particular called the Fund Finder. There's Peterson's, there's FastWeb, which FastWeb is definitely one of those that lots of opportunities, but you're going to get a lot of communication in your inbox. There is an article, and I don't recall it off the top of my head. There may be a way that we can follow up when I can provide this link, but has what I feel is a really good assessment of kind of top 10 scholarship search engines that are currently available for students. NerdWallet is one that comes to mind as far as a site that you can go to that has a lot of good information and might help you be a little bit more kind of targeted in what you're looking at.
Maybe a couple more questions, and while maybe a question or two are coming in, as you think back to all of the interactions that you have with students, and what I guess a colleague of mine will refer to as future Trinity graduates, not just for future Trinity students, future Trinity graduates, what is some advice that you would give them in terms of the application process? If they're somebody who is interested in Trinity, but have anxiety about the process, about not just applying, but the whole process. I mean, what are some pieces of advice that you might give?
This honestly, we have been seeing this trend, unfortunately, becoming much more pronounced in the last 10, 15 years, is just the level of stress, the level of anxiety surrounding the college admissions process, especially as you're kind of seeing institutions becoming more selective, and it's just kind of compounding. One of the things that, honestly, this is easier said than done, but I always feel like it's worth mentioning is a young woman that I interviewed a few years ago, who it was, to me, it was very refreshing because she came in and she said, I've seen all my older friends stressing about this college application, college search process, and they almost kind of let it overtake their junior and senior year of high school. And she said, I don't want that to happen to me. Like, I want to be in the zone. I want to enjoy high school. And she said, if I follow the proper steps, I will probably land at a school that I'm supposed to land at and, do due diligence and all of that. So she said, I just had to reframe and shift mentally. And she said, I'm treating this as a process of self-discovery. She's like, I'm learning a lot about these institutions. I'm learning a lot about myself in the process, and truly trying to figure out which school is the right fit for me, academically, socially, financially. I thought that was awesome, because usually students feel like it's the weight of the world on their shoulders. Right. She was just having fun with it, you know. And so I try to just tell students about that kind of mental shift. One thing that I would just say too, kind of practically speaking, is make yourself known in the process. And so one of the things that colleges now are investing so much time and resources into travel, into meeting one-on-one and doing interviews. They're also tracking students' behavior and interests like crazy in their systems. And so it's kind of that demonstrated interest piece. And so whenever students can raise their hand and say, I'm interested, and meet with us one-on-one, especially at these small institutions, that there's nothing that can replace that. And that humanizes the process, and it truly allows the student to stand out from other applicants if we have met them and have had a conversation with them. So that, I think that's a good way of just distinguishing themselves in the process.
Got it.
And I feel like I've heard you say, Justin, before that there's not necessarily just one institution that is going to be the right and the I have to be here institution. It's all about fit. And I hear the word anxiety, and I understand that as far as if you're thinking that there's just this single focused one thing I'm trying to find in a haystack, then that can exacerbate the process. So going in and self-discovery, having fun, and also being kind to yourself as a family in the process. A mentor of mine once said that the areas in which we work in can be the most anxiety producing, specifically for parents, because it involves their children and their finances. And both of those individually can create anxiety. And so when you do kind of the double header, it can just... being kind to yourself, finding times, like I've heard you also say, you know, don't talk about the college search like continually. Pick pockets of time that you know as a family are you're identified. Okay, we're gonna have these conversations now. We know this is the scheduled time, and we don't have to be bringing it into every space that we're in.
It can help keep the sanity of the family.
Exactly.
You know,
exactly.
So one last question. It's a pretty quick question, or can be quick. It's an admissions question, actually, this time. Justin, you said that GPA is the #1 factor in admissions. Is there a target GPA that prospective students should aim for?
This year, the average GPA on a 4-point scale was about a 3.7 for our accepted students. So that's when I was referring back to kind of, it seems like we're seeing kind of this caliber increasing, which is great. The thing to keep in mind, really, context is everything for us. And so I think most people would understand that, you know, a 3.5 GPA in a really rigorous curriculum looks really different than a 3.5 in all regular coursework. A 3.5 at school A can look really different than a 3.5 at school X, Y, or Z. And so we spend a lot of time on transcripts, probably the most time just digging into transcripts, looking at trends, grade patterns. And so, you know, I think for us, that is where we kind of tend to focus on, but we're also focusing on the core academic subject areas as opposed to all the electives. And so students typically on that 3-7 scale, they're not getting like the A for office aid and, you know, that kind of thing. So
exactly.
All right. Well, with that note, I appreciate my guests here for sharing their expertise. One last plug for Trinity Alumni Weekend next weekend. If you haven't registered, do so. You can show up, but from a headcount standpoint, they always appreciate a registration. It'll be a lot of fun. You may see me there with 3 kids hanging off of my legs. I will be having fun if I'm not, you know, sweating too much, but it'll be a great time. The other thing I want to do in terms of housekeeping is invite you all to join us for next month's webinar on October 23rd. A very different topic, wellness-based on Ayurveda. It will be a live conversation with an expert in the field, Aziba Khan, class of 2000. So again, Thank you both for joining me in this conversation. I hope you learned something. I hope we didn't create more anxiety. I hope we dispelled anxiety. And if nothing else, you know that you have folks here, not just here in the on stage, but in the community that can help ease your fears and can help you and anybody else you're trying with that college admissions process now. Hopefully they're future Trinity graduates. And again, thank you both, and go Tigers.
Thank you.